Coming up, there are multiple lines of evidence from polls to betting markets to the behavior of the two candidates that gives you an idea of what's happening. I'm going to try to read between the lines for you. And Raheem Kassam, editor of the National Pulse, joins me. We're going to talk about the final lap of the campaign. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Here we are one day before the election, and I'm going to do my best to read between the lines to tell you, as of right now, what I think is going on. And the way to try to assess what's going on is not to look at one thing, but to try to look at 3 or 4 different things and to see if they harmonize with one another. So one of them, of course, is going to be the polls. We'll talk about that. The second one is to look at the betting markets where people are putting money. The third is to look at the behavior of the candidates, because the candidates themselves have access to very important inside information. They know how the campaign is going. They have internal polling that is reputedly more surgical, more targeted, in a way more comprehensive than the kind of stuff that standard pollsters put out there. And you have to look to see if the two candidates, their behavior is going to tell you what their internal information systems are telling them, what their campaign is telling them to do. Listen, Kamala, you know what? Your only path to success is Pennsylvania. You stay in Pennsylvania today. And that's what Kamala is doing, by the way. She's doing multiple rallies in Pennsylvania. She is, you could say, betting the farm on Pennsylvania. Now, Trump's behavior, by contrast, has been to jump all over the place. In fact, not even to stay in the so-called battleground states. Trump was in New Mexico. Trump in the last state today is going to be in the swing states. He's going to be in North Carolina. He's going to be in Pennsylvania. And I think he's going to be in Michigan. So he's leapfrogging to 3 different places. And that's interesting in and of itself. Kamala's rhetoric has gotten more shrill, I think. You see her, she's hectoring the audience, she's shouting a lot more. Trump seems more relaxed. He seems to be kind of enjoying himself. I think that if you're going to read anything into that, it is that Trump is pretty confident. Trump's internals are telling him that he's doing well. And Kamala's internals are telling her that she's going into a more frenetic mode of trying to whip people up into a frenzy, which is, by the way, the kind of thing you do when you feel that that things are slipping away from you. Psychologically, that's how I read those reactions. Kamala is also doing something that politically would seem, it's understandable at one level, but it's also revealing in another. She's giving you blatantly opposite messages, not just in when she's asked questions, but in her advertising. So in Pennsylvania, she's a friend of Israel. She understands what happens on October 7th. Israel has every right to defend itself. In Michigan, where there's a fairly sizable Muslim population, she's all about Gaza. She's all against genocide. She's going to stop the genocide. So clearly she is, as they say, talking out of both sides of her mouth. And in an era of social media, you're going to be busted for doing that. Lincoln, by the way, flashing back now to the Lincoln days, Lincoln said, look, I might emphasize things a little differently when I speak in one part of the state as opposed to the other. He was talking, by the way, about Illinois in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. But he goes, but if you look at my message, it's going to be the same. I'm not going to say one thing over here and another thing over there. All politicians, in a sense, trim their views because they're addressing a specific audience. but I'm going to maintain a consistency. Well, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything like that. In her rally in Pennsylvania, evidently she's going for another celebrity extravaganza. Lady Gaga is going to show up, Ricky Martin, Oprah, and somebody called Fat Joe. Do you know who Fat Joe is? Yeah, I don't know either. I think there was a kid named Joe in school in India, and I think we may have called him Fat Joe, but I don't think he's the same guy. Now,
especially because Kamala wants nothing to do with India.
if you look at the polls, it looks like Trump is going to win. I say this based upon surveying many different polls, which are pointing kind of in the same direction. Now, all the polls are really close, so none of this should be taken as it's an easy matter. There is a possibility, in my view, that Trump will run away with it, will win in a kind of landslide, not a Reagan landslide, not even a Nixon landslide, but by a landslide. I mean, think about it. If basically Trump won 5 out of the 6 swing states, that would be kind of a landslide, in that the electoral votes would be lopsidedly for Trump against Harris. Real Clear Politics has Trump at 287 electoral votes, Harris at 251. And in this map, you have Harris winning Michigan and Wisconsin, but losing Pennsylvania. And then Trump winning a number of the other swing states, including Arizona, including Georgia, including North Carolina. Here's Decision Desk headquarters, which gives Trump a 53% probability of winning and Harris 47%. The electoral vote projection, Trump 275, Harris 263. So again, pretty close. And one state or two could really tip that balance. If you look at the toss-up states, Wisconsin, 51% for Trump. I mean, that's a very narrow. Pennsylvania, 53% for Trump. Nevada, 53% for Trump. Michigan, 58% for Harris. Arizona, 61% for Trump. Georgia, 65% for Trump. North Carolina, 65% for Trump. New Hampshire, 70% for Harris. The New York Times came out with a poll which was basically for Trump, slightly, calling a roughly even contest, but saying that Trump has 5 or 6 different pathways to victory. There is no state that Trump cannot afford to lose. He could lose Pennsylvania and still win. So the old doctrine of it's all up to Pennsylvania isn't really right. Trump could win the election and lose Pennsylvania. He could win in 4 or 5 different configurations, and the New York Times provides these maps. Kamala Harris can't. She has a kind of a one-way path to victory, and her behavior, by the way, is congruent with that. Kamala Harris is not campaigning heavily in places that I think... When is the last time Kamala Harris was really campaigning in Arizona, for example? I don't think she thinks Arizona is winnable. She was campaigning in North Carolina. They pulled out $2 million worth of advertising, kind of a way of saying, all right, we can use this money better elsewhere. And very interestingly, she put that money to shore up Virginia. Let's turn to the Axis Intel poll. This is, by the way, the pollster that was most accurate in 2020. Bigger margin for Trump. Atlas Intel predicts Trump will get 312 electoral votes. Harris will get 226. Now think about that. That's close to a landslide. That's almost 100 electoral votes ahead for Trump. According to that calculus, Harris is going to lose Michigan. She's going to lose Wisconsin. She's going to lose Pennsylvania. Think about that. Think of how devastating it would be to the Democrats to lose those states. Really, all she's getting is Minnesota. She'll get Virginia, New Mexico. I mean, states that we, by and large, already put into the blue column. So according to the Atlas poll, by and large, if you look at these swing states, Trump's going to win every single one of them, according to Atlas. We'll see. There is an outlier that's worth discussing, and that is Ann Seltzer's poll in Iowa, showing Kamala Harris winning Iowa. Now, this is extremely strange. Iowa is a red state. The Emerson poll, which came out at around the same time, shows Trump winning the state by 10 points. So something is really wrong here. And I got to say, when Ann Seltzer went on television, she was interviewed by Mark Halperin about this, and they were going through the poll, her own poll. She sounded like she was on drugs. And by that I mean she's looking at her own poll and she says, and I'm now quoting her, "What is the R and what is the D?" So, no, honey, this is true. No. So Mark Halperin goes, "Well, I believe the R is Republican and the D is Democrat. Aren't you supposed to be a professional pollster? You don't know what the R and the D stand for in your own poll?" So something is up here, and I think that this poll can be safely disregarded. It is such an outlier. It is so crazy that even though this was circulated among the Democrats and disseminated by the Democrats as a kind of, here's a motivator for you Democrats. Look, we're even winning Iowa. One of the things that Trump had said in one of his interviews, this may be in the Rogan interview, is the Democrats use polls as a campaigning tactic. They like to show the momentums with them. And this is true because even on the betting markets, by the way, there was a very interesting phenomenon over the last couple of days. A couple of the big betting markets, including poly markets, suddenly Trump was losing his lead. Now, he never lost his lead in poly market, but the lead which was 30 points, went down to like 8 points. And then people who dug into it were like, Democrats at the last minute are buying. They're putting large amounts of money on Harris. And the reasoning is they're not even doing this to make money. This is not an objective economic decision, which is what gives these betting markets their reliability. They're trying to create momentum. They're almost looking at their bet as a campaign donation to Kamala Harris to give her last minute momentum. But guess what? Even that has a limited duration. By that I mean within 24 hours, the betting markets had turned again. Trump is now pulling away from Harris. He's 20 to 25 points ahead. And so you get a little bit of a surge with that kind of a buying spree, but you ultimately do, and this is partly what makes these markets so reliable, right? It's like trying to manipulate the stock market. You can do it if you put a giant amount of money on one stock. You can affect the buying of the stock, but probably not in the longer term. You're going to do it for a few hours, maybe even for a day, but after a while, people are going to go, no, someone is just buying for the sake of buying or to drive the price up. The intrinsic value, or at least the valuation of this stock is now overstated. Rasmussen reports, here's Mark Mitchell. He basically says, get ready for a landslide for Trump. And he goes, I'm putting my chips on the line on this. It's not going to be close. And he makes a further point that is worth noting. He says the pollsters actually know this. He goes, all these pollsters want to hedge their bets. All these pollsters don't want to disappoint the Democrats. All these pollsters want to kind of keep themselves in business. And so the way they do that is I'm not saying that they lie about their result, but what they do is they play the old kind of Gigo game. Gigo game? Well, that's garbage in, garbage out. You see, you can manipulate the outcome of a poll by manipulating the sample that you're polling. Let's say you want to show a closer election than is really the case. You know what? You just poll 55% of Democrats and 45% of Republicans. Really close. Oh man, we can't tell who's going to win this election. You've determined that outcome in advance by pre-selecting a sample size that is weighted in favor of the Democrats. So these kinds of shenanigans are going on in the polling community. So this is a reason, by the way, to take all polls, including the polls that favor Trump, with a grain of salt. So all that being said, this is my way of reading between the lines. I think that Trump is looking good for tomorrow. Of course, the Democrats have a secret weapon. It's called the cheat factor. And we have a secret weapon. I was telling Debbie about this morning. What's our secret weapon? We don't tell the truth to pollsters, or we hang up on them. We don't answer. that is the secret support for Trump factor, and that's something that you can even observe in your own community. Notice that people that you know are for Trump are not going to wear a Trump shirt. They're not going to wear a Trump hat. We're in a neighborhood where our whole cul-de-sac is for Trump, I think with one exception. So we have like 10 families that are for Trump. We're the only people who have a big Trump side, Trump van. So we have a big Ted Cruz sign in our yard. So we're the only ones advertising it. Everybody else is maintaining a prudent silence. There's a lot at stake in this upcoming election, but regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. 4 years of a conservative presidency won't be enough to turn the tide entirely on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, whoa, it's like throwing gas on a dumpster fire. You don't totally control the election's outcome, but you can diversify your savings now by investing in gold from Birch Gold, like Debbie and I have. For millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, global strife, and it can help protect you now. Birch Gold, my gold company, will help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold, and it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the past 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined. The price of gold has increased 40%. Is it a coincidence? I think not. Get started. Text Dinesh to 989898. You'll get a free information kit on gold. Trust Birch Gold, as I do, to protect your savings. Again, text Dinesh to 989898 today. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today. Take control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Raheem Kassam. He's the editor-in-chief at the National Pulse, former editor-in-chief of Breitbart News London Bureau. You can follow him on X at Raheem Kassam, the website thenationalpulse.com. Raheem, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. We're on the very last lap of this frenetic election campaign. Let's talk about the closing argument that each side is making just right before Election Day. What is Kamala Harris's closing argument as you understand it?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dinesh, and thank you for putting up with, I think, all of us. I'm talking to the audience here who have been, just spinning between joy and despair for the last maybe 18 months as all of this is played out. And, we try and do our best to unpack it. I think that first question is really important because it comes down to consistency as a theme, as a topic, as something that you want in a campaign. And unfortunately for her, she has not even been consistently the Democratic candidate, let alone had a consistent message throughout her very short campaign. And I think that is particularly where she is hurting right now. A lot of the people who might even have sensibilities that lean toward her are still not sure if they'll go out and actually tick the box on the day, just because they're not quite sure which Kamala Harris they might get in the event that she wins. Are they going to get the joyful Kamala? Are they going to get the prosecutor Kamala? Are they going to get the person who calls everybody Nazis Kamala? Are they getting the black Kamala or the Asian Kamala? There's a lot of these different things that she has tried to, mishmash into an identity as a candidate. And I think her closing argument as a result has kind of been all over the place. It's been a concatenation of abortion and hatred, right? Vitriol towards the other side, and playing into kind of just the base tendencies of her most likely highest propensity voters. And that is predominantly women. It is predominantly suburban women. These are all of the things that we know. The interesting flip side of that, I think, is that Donald Trump has had the consistency factor all throughout. Donald Trump has had the consistency factor, frankly, on some of these big topics like tariffs and trade for the last 40 years. So America knows who he is. They know what they're getting. It was a very interesting thing to watch the left and some of the Rhino Republican class attack the Project 2025 stuff, because what they were trying to do there is inject a sense of inconsistency, a sense of this secret plan behind the scenes. And Donald Trump isn't the Donald Trump you've known for 40 years after all. There's all these like new characters and new ideas coming in there, and it just never landed. So Trump's closing arguments, very much what you would expect, very much the same things, and very much the top priorities of the nation: economy, immigration, trade, foreign wars. That is Trumpism.
And what you're saying with Kamala, I think, is very interesting, because I think what you're saying is that you might have different people who have different reasons to want to vote for her, but because she's all over the place, she leaves those people bewildered, because and the bewilderment leads to demotivation, because then you're like, I'm not really sure. I mean, it is an effort to get out and vote. And so unless someone has a motivation, I'm trying to save the country, I'm trying to stop the regime, I'm trying to save America. If you believe, like, I've got this kind of waffler on my hands, and I don't know what she's going to really do, the undecided voter particularly is going to, I think, be a little bit skeptical. Do you think that this election is a referendum on Kamala, or is it a referendum on Trump?
I don't think it's necessarily a referendum on either candidate. And just to sort of come back to what you were saying there, she's a babbler. She's a flibbertigibbet, right? She likes to waffle on, and she likes to throw out all these celebrity endorsements and all of that. But back to that point you were making, is it's not quite clear that people are just willing to vote because, hey, Cardi B told me to, or Taylor Swift told me to. It's not enough to get somebody to the polls. And while Trump has had his celebrity endorsers, and of course, the most wealthy man in the world is obviously one of his key surrogates, those aren't the reasons, those aren't the primary rationales that people are using to go to the ballot box and vote for Donald Trump. He has a much more positive campaign, a much more positive message, and a much more stable and concrete policy platform than she does. I don't think it's necessarily a referendum on either of these candidates, even though some people would like it to be. It's a referendum on the trajectory of the nation. It's a referendum on the trajectory of Western civilization. But more than anything, quite frankly, not to be trite about this, it's a referendum on how much money is in people's pockets. I think we try and be too clever with things at times, in trying to get into these, demographic groups and their motivations and the subsects and all of that. But if you come down to the very basics, it is the economy, stupid, right? It is how much marginal propensity to consume is out there as a result of the government's policies. And people just know in their hearts that Trump has that inclination to put more money in their pockets. He doesn't have the inclination to take more money away. For most people, that's it. That's the big thing right now.
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere that if you rank the issues, you would have to rank them economy number 1, border number 2, abortion number 3. And so Kamala may have number 3 on her side, but 1 and 2 are not working for her. Now, you would think that her challenge, and it's an insurmountable challenge, maybe this would even help to explain why she is all over the place, is because you've got the majority of Americans, an overwhelming majority, who don't like the direction the country is going in. And that would seem to suggest, almost as an unalterable political law, throw the bums out. So Kamala and Biden are the 2 bums who've been running the place. And so Kamala now has the burden of showing, well, I'm not one of those bums. I've got a different plan. So how does she do this? This is her real vulnerability. Do you think that there was a way for her to do it? Or do you think that she's just caught in a vice or a trap that she really can't get out of, no matter what she does. Even if she had Obama's eloquence, she would still nevertheless be, hey, listen, this was your economy, these are your policies, this was your border, and so, gee, if we want more of it, we'll vote for you. If we don't, there's another guy standing in the wings who says he'll do it differently.
It's such a great question. You phrase it so well because you almost give me the answer, honestly. And here's the answer to that. Her campaign has had to be, hey, I'm not one of those bums. I'm a different bum, right? Like I'm a slightly different bum to those guys. I worked for the bums. I've worked alongside those bums. I've made excuses for those bums. I've even hidden the fact that one of those bums, the bum in chief, has been very unwell and unable to lead the country and unable to be the commander in chief. But we hid it from the American public, and that is a subconscious thing I think that dwells in the minds of most likely voters. That hey, at the end of the day, maybe she isn't Joe Biden, although she's done really nothing to prove that she isn't Joe Biden or hasn't been, at least one of the people puppeteering Joe Biden for the last 4 years. But she has this incredible, it's Sisyphean in its magnitude task of trying to convince people that she is somehow different from the apparatus. But the problem doesn't just lie there. The problem also lies in the fact that she actually also does need to openly and actively signal to the apparatus that, hey, don't worry, I'm still one of you guys. I'm not going to deviate too far. I'm a safe pair of hands. We're going to give Ukraine loads more money, all of this stuff. So she's just twirling and twirling and twirling around in circles, trying to placate all of these vested interests. And voters don't like when they can openly see candidates doing that. If you ask me if I feel sorry for it, I kind of feel sorry for her team in a lot of ways. It wasn't really, I can get a little bit arrogant about the way I negotiate the political scene, but even I don't think that I could have made much better of a fist of this campaign than her team has. They did actually play to their strengths in a lot of senses. A lot of high visibility television ads, not necessarily introducing your candidate too hot and heavy once that coup took place inside the Democratic Party. But there were also just magnificent flubs that they made along the way. And I think Tim Walz was one of those. I think she made that decision. She has to own that decision. He's kind of a freak show. He's up there, jazz handing around everywhere. His background with China and all of this stuff, and he calls himself. What did he call himself? Some like a dummy or something like that on the debate stage with J.D. Vance. While J.D. Vance is tearing around you in rings on policy, you call yourself a knucklehead because you lied about your trip to communist China. There were so many opportunities, I think, along the way that just a tiny little bit of introspection on her behalf would have led her down a much better path. But listen, that's not the campaign, that's the candidate.
With Tim Walz, you're in trouble when you're accused of being evil, and your best defense is, I'm not evil, I'm merely stupid, right? That's the point of a knucklehead defense. It's, I'm really a knucklehead, I'm too dumb to know better. We'll be right back with Raheem Kassam. Mike Lindell is such a good guy. He's got a heart of gold. Mike and MyPillow love giving back to those in need. They sent a truckload of 14,000 MyPillows to those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But even though he loves to give back, a large retail store just canceled a huge order that had already left the warehouse. So Mike, besides giving back to those in need, wants to pass some big savings directly on to you. For the first time ever, you can get a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices, just $14.88. Gets better. For a limited time, they're offering the entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen-size MyPillows, $18.88. Upgrade to king for just $1 more. Get the body pillows, $29.88. Multi-use MyPillows, just $9.88. Go to mypillow.com, use promo code Dinesh, or you can call 800-876-0227 to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. On top of that, get free shipping on orders over $75. These deals have never been offered so low before. Again, go to mypillow.com, or you can call 800-876-0227. Use promo code Dinesh. Get the standard MyPillow for just $14.88, the lowest price ever. There are limited quantities of this price, and once they're gone, they're gone. Guys, I'd like to invite you to check out my Locals channel and consider becoming an annual subscriber. Big plans for the channel in the year ahead. I post a lot of exclusive content on Locals, including content that's censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored, and you can also interact with me directly. I do a live weekly Q&A every Tuesday. I'll be doing a big one tomorrow. Election night, no topic is off limits. I've also got a movie page up on Locals with films. 2000 Mules is up there. The film that came out last year, Police State, and the new one, Vindicating Trump. If you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch this movie content for free. It's included with your annual subscription. So check out the channel. It's dinesh.locals.com. I'd love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. Back with Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief at The National Pulse. Follow him on X at Raheem Kassam, the website, thenationalpulse.com. Raheem, I'm hearing it said by pollsters and also by a lot of other guys that the election is really this is really one of those gender gap elections, that if it were up to women, Kamala Harris would be the next president. If it were up to men alone, there's no question that it would be Trump. Do you agree with that assessment? And what do you think is the sort of gender gap driving factor? Is it really as simple as, hey, listen, the abortion issue is cutting very heavily on the side of women, whereas men are voting perhaps more for economic factors or other factors, the border? And secondly, what do you think about the probability that men will turn out en masse on election day and basically win it for Trump?
There's almost no way of answering this question without getting in trouble with Media Matters or whatever, so I'm just going to go for it. The Kamala campaign is playing an emotional argument towards women, and in a lot of senses it works. Women are more emotional beings. We have to accept that. Like, as a generalization, I'm not trying to be say that every single one votes that way. I know plenty of strong, patriotic, MAGA voting women who exercise their vote on a logical basis, but she's targeting a general emotional reaction within a liberal leaning woman to say, hey, these people want to, they monitor the length of your menstruation cycle. They want to monitor, how often you go to the doctors. They want to check, who you're having sexual relations with, and all this nonsense, right? Frankly, abrasive, disgusting nonsense from the left that is designed to make especially younger, less experienced, potentially fearful women. That's what they're doing. They're trying to inject this sense of dread and fear and concern and Handmaid's Tale and all of that stuff. And in a lot of senses, yes, it is working. I will say this, though. I think while it is clear that the data is telling us that there is this gigantic split between the sexes in America right now, and indeed this is happening in other countries in the Western world too, I think also we have a tendency perhaps to overblow it. There are particular issues in particular election cycles that take hold. Lots of money gets thrown after them. Lots of lobbyists talk about them. Abortion is certainly that one, because we are still in the immediate aftermath of Roe. But I'll give you an example from back where I'm from. Back in 2016, everything to do with anything, if it rained for too long on a Tuesday afternoon, they blamed Brexit. And so this knock-on effect will cease at some point, especially as people start to realize that, hey, actually, even if Kamala, marched into the White House tomorrow and Joe Biden's out, she still cannot do what she's promising to do on the subject of the euphemism of women's healthcare, right? There isn't a pathway for her necessarily to get everything she wants done on that issue. So she's just winding these people up, and they're going to realize that after a certain point. Listen, women can stick together, men can stick together, different racial groups can stick together, whatever it is. So there's an element of that comes into play too. Like, hey, wouldn't it be nice for women if there was a woman president? And a lot of people, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people, unfortunately, think along those lines. They think along the kind of tick box exercise that nations, democracies, republics should go through in their heads, as if we're living in some kind of bureaucratic census type demos, instead of being a policy-driven nation and civilization. So, yeah, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But the data is showing that, at least in this election, gender does seem to be quite important.
And what about the second part of that, which is that if this election hinges on men showing up, there's a stereotype that men are just a little more irresponsible than women. Women get things done. If they have to go to the doctor, they're at the doctor. The man may or may not show up. And perhaps the same can be said of election day, right? In other words, under normal circumstances, Trump should have this in the bag, given the size of the early vote, given the discrepancies between 2024 and 2020, the high motivation of the Trump supporters, the relatively low motivation of the Democrats. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's not up to a poll. It's not up to a betting market. People actually have to show up and vote. And my question is, do you think the guys will do that?
Yeah, that's really, really smart as well, because men can get more lethargic, certainly lose our patience more if we're waiting in line for 4 hours or 5 hours or whatever it is at the polling station. Certainly have an air of bullshitness about us. So wearing a MAGA hat to a polling station when you really probably shouldn't be wearing political things and signaling to poll workers, how you're going to vote. Men would tend to just be like, oh, I'll do whatever the heck I want, and all of these little things can absolutely come into play. This is what I keep trying to remind people, is that this isn't as simple as just a campaign and the day of election. There is the possibility on this of death by 1,000 cuts. If enough people get distracted, are busy, are tired of waiting in line, take a lawn chair with you, for goodness sakes. If you know you're going to be at a polling place where the line is going to be stretching out the door, and you have a proclivity for impatience, as I do, take a Sudoku book and a lawn chair with you.
Not to mention, you might want to make a bathroom stop before you get in line.
Yeah, absolutely. All of these little things will matter, because what will end up happening is you might go, okay, it's 2:00 in the afternoon. There's a 4-hour line. Maybe it'll be done a little bit later on. So you go back and the line's even longer, and then you don't actually go in and get to cast your vote for that day. And that's it. That's how quickly and easily things like this can slip away. And there are certain counties across America where, my opinion, the people who are running the polling stations do not have it in your best interest to actually get your vote in. They have it in their best interest to get their candidate over the line. They have it in their best interest to close the polling station and get home at the end of the day. So nobody's there to help you. You have to help yourself. You have to make sure that your vote counts. That's on you, ladies and gentlemen.
I saw in the New York Times, and I found this to be pretty telling coming from the New York Times. In their latest survey, they made two interesting disclosures. One is they said that there were fewer Republicans who respond to polls than Democrats. And in a way, what they were saying is that our poll might be understating the Trump vote. And it was still showing Trump winning. But the second thing that they said is that it appears that Trump has multiple paths to the presidency. In other words, there are 7 maps that can show a Trump win. Trump could win it this way, or he could win it that way. With Kamala Harris, there's kind of one map. She has one pathway, and that pathway is she has to win Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, all 3. She could not really afford to lose any one of those states. Do you take this as an encouraging sign looking at tomorrow? I mean, as you consider the possibilities here, we're trying to read between the lines. How do you think this is going to come out?
Yeah. I think he wins, and I think pretty much for that reason. When you look at who answers the telephone calls, and look, we were all friends with pollsters. I have pollster friends on the left, on the right, in the middle, who have almost zero political opinion, some of them, and are just in it because they're mathematics nerds and they love the practice of it. And pretty much all of them, if you get a few drinks in them, will tell you the same thing. We just kind of have to make it up on the fly, right? We pick a model, we try and stick to that model. If it breaks, we tweak it, etc. And it's a complete sort of ever evolving science. This new one that they have out now, the stratification poll, the MRP sort of thing, where they take, tens of thousands of people across what they think are representative constituencies around different countries. And look, in the British election, some of those big new polls got it bang on. Some of them were ridiculously far off. And if you ask the pollster and you go, well, what happened? They go, well, we were just trying a new thing. I don't know what to tell you. This is our job. We have to, it's trial and error. And look, Republican voters, especially nervy new ones, are likely to pick up the phone from a withheld number or unknown number or whatever it is and go hello, and the person on the other end of the phone goes, hi, I just want to call to see how you're voting. And they go, excuse me, click. I do not want people in my business. I don't know who that is. I don't know what list I'm going on. I don't know what database I might be added to and how I might be targeted as a result of answering one of those questions incorrectly. And also, I like to think we're a little bit more discerning about the private information we give out than a lot of liberals are. So yeah, I listen, I know people like to talk about polls all day long. I know people like to tweet about polls all day long. I try not to do it so much anymore because I just find the whole thing to be quite the farce. It's better for political commentators and political analysts, I think, to get out into the field themselves, to get out to as many states as possible, to speak to as many people as possible. I have a tremendous habit of going to bars and just talking to people about what's going on in their neighborhoods and their communities and figuring out that way. And I think if you look at my prediction pattern over the last decade, I think I've pretty much been more right than the pollsters all along the way. So I'm going to answer your question and say, I think it's going to be Trump. I even think we might have a surprise somewhere.
I mean, what you're saying is really fascinating, and it mirrors something that's been happening in the corporate world. Corporations used to rely on poll data to try to figure out if people will like this product or that product. And then they realized that there are more shorthand ways of getting information. Like if you want to know who's if it's crowded at the Walmart, go take photos of their parking lot. That's going to tell you a lot about how many cars are in the parking lot. It's probably a better predictor for how many people are in that store than going around with a survey and trying to get a representative sample of people to say whether they shop at Walmart or not. Last question, Raheem. However we look at it, it's a close election, right? And that alone is a little disturbing in the sense that we have in Kamala Harris a quite ridiculous candidate. We have in Trump a very confident, successful, the guy was a massive cultural celebrity before he entered politics. In some ways, is it a bad reflection on the country, no matter how it comes out tomorrow? Just the fact that the election is even close, is that a reason for a certain type of long-term cultural pessimism, if you will, about the American electorate?
There are days I wake up and I feel, the sense of doom that I think a lot of people have exercised throughout the entire campaign, but they're rare for me. I'm usually an optimist, and even though I think trajectory-wise, Western civilization has been on a pretty bad trajectory for a while now, there are so many signs that people are actually alive to the longevity of this thing, right? And what it means if it all disappears and if it all crumbles, if the infrastructure goes away, if the dollar ceases to be the primary reserve currency, if we don't actually take steps to intervene in government in our lives. And the pandemic was, of course, a massive wake-up call for so many people. The fact that so many like Elon Musk and those guys and RFK can come out and have historically been Democrats and then go for somebody, not just a Mitt Romney Republican or something, but somebody who they call a Nazi, somebody who they call a fascist, somebody who they've targeted, somebody who they've shot at, somebody who they've tried to put in jail since he left office, I think tells you so much about the vim and the passion of this movement. And it's not just here in the United States. This has been the case since Brexit in the United Kingdom. It's happening across Europe. It's been happening in Brazil. It's been happening in India. So many of these countries, countries with democratic underpinnings, I think, are starting to realize that the status quo of World Economic Forum style neoliberal end of history Fukuyama theory is actually the decline. It's possible to have a world without the managerial class, without the elites dictating to people, and how we get there is still, I think, another decade plus project. But the seeds have already been sown. And the generational pick that was J.D. Vance, I think, is such an amazing thing for people to be able to, regardless of how this election goes, to go, actually, that we understand that to be the future of the Republican Party, that to be the future of the conservative movement. And we are never, you want to take a line out of Kamala Harris's speeches, we are not going back to Mitt Romney. We are not going back to David Cameron. We are not going back to Angela Merkel. The right, the center right, should confine to the dustbin of history those people who tried to placate the lettered institutions and who tried to put the control of all of the Western peoples in the hands of a few moneyed elite. Those people's days are over.
I agree completely, and I also endorse your use of the word vim, which is not really which is one of your British expressions that I don't think I've heard in 30 years. But I've been talking to Raheem Kassam, guys, editor-in-chief at The National Pulse, the website, thenationalpulse.com. Raheem, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm discussing my book, The Big Lie, which is now out in paperback. Very nice edition from Regnery, so pick it up. You can also, this way you can read along as I go through the key themes of this book. And the central issue here is whether fascism and Nazism is a threat from our side or from their side. Is it a phenomenon of the left? Is it a phenomenon of the right? And all the rhetoric about Trump is Hitler, the Republicans are fascists, is a subset of that fundamental question. When people on the left say Trump is Hitler, by the way, they don't mean that Trump is Hitler 1945. They don't mean that Trump has killed 6 million Jews, obviously. So what do they mean? Well, what they mean is that Trump is like early Hitler. Trump is the Hitler who actually won a free election. Now, I say that with a caveat. Hitler wasn't directly elected, but his party, the Nazi Party, got the most votes. It was the largest party in Germany, and then Hitler was offered the chancellorship of Germany by the president of the Republic, and that's how Hitler came to power. So he came to power. If you don't say democratically, then he did come to power constitutionally. Now, obviously, that election which brought Hitler to power in 1933 was not followed by any other election, and Hitler ultimately was killed by his own bullet. But the point is, we do need to examine where this fascism, where this Nazism is coming from. And is it even really a threat in our society now? Or is it just a fiction, a bugaboo made up by the left? I want to actually argue that there are aspects of fascism, perhaps not so much Nazism, but certainly fascism, that we're dealing with in our society now. And even arguably elements of Nazism. And by that I mean one of the key distinctions between Nazism and fascism, and we'll get into this in more detail, is that fascism is not in any way racist. Fascism by itself is a philosophy of state power. It's a philosophy that combines an economic commitment to socialism with a certain idea of centralized government, but it doesn't have in and of itself a racial dimension. It certainly doesn't have in and of itself an anti-Semitic dimension. Mussolini was surrounded by Jews who were enthusiastic champions of his fascist philosophy. Hitler was a different matter. And if you look at the key difference between Hitler and Mussolini, the thing that actually separated them, it was that Hitler was not only an anti-Semite, but he gave priority to that even over other things that fascists normally care about. So you could say to Hitler, hey, listen, you're fighting a war. Like, why are we spending all this time like going after the Jews? Don't we have a big fight against Russia and against the United States and against Great Britain? Shouldn't we put all our resources into that? And you know what? Perhaps we'll deal with the Jews later. I mean, this could be an argument one could make, but Hitler would not hear of it because for Hitler, it's really important to exterminate the Jews, push them out of Germany, get rid of them. That is as important, perhaps even more important, than what's happening on the war front. Mussolini would just have nothing of this and would not go along with it, and in fact played a role in helping Jews escape from Nazi Germany and find their way, if not to freedom, then at least to safety. Now, when I embarked on this book, The Big Lie, I realized that I'm going into a little bit of uncharted territory here. Not completely uncharted, but largely uncharted, because the kind of things I'm going to explore, there is very little, there are no standard references for it, in part because of a development I'm going to describe, which is a massive intellectual effort that began after World War II to bury the truth, to confuse the issue, to redefine fascism. This was a project that was carried out by liberals and by the left, and because these are the same guys who write the textbooks, these are the same guys who dominate the media, these are the same guys who teach in the classrooms, and they have controlled the universities and the organs of thought for now 3/4 of a century. They have the power to alter the meanings of events and to alter even the meanings of words, including when we think of the word fascism, a set of associations comes into our mind. Let's try this out. If you just stop men on the street, people on the street, fascist, say the 10 things that come to your mind. People would say things like authority, nationalism, dictatorship, strong man. Well, first of all, none of that makes any sense. If you go through world history, there are innumerable strong men, innumerable authoritarians who impose their authority on other people. There are innumerable people who fight for their country. They're nationalists. You think of Mazzini in Italy, for example, or even the people who fought in the French Revolution. You think of Che Guevara. You think of Mandela. You think of Gandhi. All these people are nationalists. Does it make any sense to associate them with fascism? No. Or think of strongmen who have ruled their countries going back to times immemorial, whether in the drapery of a monarchy or whether they're just dictators of the kind of Latin American kind of caudillo stripe where you just got some military guy who takes power, kind of like a Noriega, and just decides, oh, I'm the toughest guy around here. I'm going to run this country. Does that automatically make this guy a fascist? Of course not. So you realize that the whole definition of fascism is on very thin ground. This can't be what fascism really is, any more than if somebody takes a rival ideology and gives such vague descriptions that it doesn't seem to apply particularly to anything specific. You go, well, that can't make any sense. So we come back to the question of how do you dig into this topic? How do you get information? Now, interestingly, as I looked into it, one of the first people unexpectedly to talk about fascism as a phenomenon of the left is the writer and the economist Friedrich Hayek. In his book, The Road to Serfdom, which was published in 1944. So, this is at a very critical time. The war is ending. The Allies are going to emerge victorious. The project I just described of rewriting the history of the previous several decades is about to begin. But Hayek is already there. And Hayek is a European. He sees it up close. And he says two things. One is he says fascism has always been on the left. And he goes, number two, he goes, the fascist ideology and the communist ideology and the progressive ideology of the West, the progressive ideology that in some ways has mobilized against these fascist powers, he goes, there's a resemblance among them. And he says that even in 1944, the progressive countries have developed blueprints and formulas that are moving their societies in the direction of fascism. So this is a very bold statement by Hayek, and Hayek is standing almost alone in this contention. In other words, In other words, Hayek has this. It's not even the best known part of his of the road to serfdom. The main thrust of the work is the idea that Western countries are moving towards statism, and that statism is going to represent a new type of serfdom. But underpinning that is Hayek's point that having defeated or being on the verge of defeating fascism as a German power, as an Italian power, we in the West, we in America are starting to become more like them. We're starting to resemble the fascists we profess to hate. So this was Hayek. I'm quoting him now. The rise of fascism and Nazism was not a reaction against the socialist trends of the preceding period, but a necessary outcome of those tendencies. This is a very telling phrase. Hayek is not saying that fascism and socialism are identical. He's saying that fascism and Nazism are a kind of logical progression or outgrowth, as he calls it, a necessary outcome of those tendencies. So what he's saying, and we'll see what he means by this and why this is true, fascism is building on the top of the foundation of socialism. It's modifying socialism in an important way, but nevertheless, it is trying to create its own new type of socialism. And so Hayek becomes my starting point. And my second starting point, which I'm going to pick up tomorrow, is Jonah Goldberg's book, which is called Liberal Fascism, a book that is quite prescient in examining the defects and, in fact, the similarities between progressivism and fascism, but for reasons that I'll go into tomorrow, stays away, almost assiduously avoids the issue of Nazism. Jonah just doesn't want to go there. I'll tell you why he doesn't want to go there. I certainly go there. In fact, that's the point where the big lie takes off.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.